This is a town of constant reminders. Wounded by the loss of a child, 1 month on they are as determined as ever to find April Jones. The mayor told me it has been an horrific month.
It's the first topic of conversation, and in many cases the only one as well. We are still very much aware that April is not home, and we need to find April, and we're very supportive of her family.
A 5-year-old girl was lured into a predator's van, taken to his house where unspeakable horrors unfolded, then burned alive in his fireplace while still conscious. Her screams echoed through the night as her killer tried to erase every trace of her existence. This is the nightmare that became reality for little April Jones, and what you're about to hear will haunt you forever. Welcome back to Cold Crime Cases, where we uncover the darkest truths that society tries to forget. Before we dive into this devastating case, I need to know, where are you watching from tonight? Drop your location in the comments below, and while you're there, hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell. Some people scroll by when they see cases like this. You didn't. That means you care. Subscribing is free, but it helps uncover the next hidden case, before it happens again. Now, let me take you back to October 1st, 2012, in the quiet Welsh town of Machynlleth, a place where evil wore a familiar face and monsters lived next door. April Jones entered this world on April 4, 2007, in the picturesque Welsh town of Machynlleth. This wasn't just any ordinary town, it was the kind of place where everyone knew everyone, where children could play safely in the streets, and where the biggest worry was whether it might rain during the annual fair. With a population hovering just above 2,000 souls, Machynlleth was nestled far from the chaos of big cities, wrapped in rolling hills and ancient history. April was the baby of the family, the youngest of 3 children who brought endless joy to her parents' lives. Her older brother and sister adored her, and she had this infectious laugh that could light up any room. She was obsessed with her bright pink bicycle. You'd see her racing through the narrow streets of Machynlleth, her blonde hair streaming behind her like a banner of pure childhood freedom. Swimming was another passion of hers, and she'd spend hours at the local pool, fearless in the water despite her young age. When April turned 5, she started primary school with the kind of excitement that only a child can possess. Her teachers immediately noticed something special about this little girl. She wasn't just bright, she was determined, the kind of student who would tackle problems head-on and never give up. But what really set April apart was her social nature. She could walk into a room full of strangers and leave with a dozen new friends. It was a gift that made her beloved by everyone who met her. October 1st, 2012, started like any other Monday in the Jones household. April bounced out of bed with her usual energy, excited about her swimming lesson at the local sports center that evening. While April splashed around in the pool, perfecting her strokes, her parents attended a school meeting, just another routine part of family life in their quiet town. After the lesson, April's excitement reached new heights when she convinced her parents to let her friend come over for the evening. The 2 girls settled in to watch cartoons, giggling and whispering the way only best friends can. As the clock approached 7 in the evening, April's restless energy kicked in. She wanted to go outside, to ride her bike, to feel the cool October air on her face. At first, her mother hesitated. The sun was already beginning to set, and darkness came early in October. But April had a way of being persuasive that was hard to resist. She'd done exceptionally well in school the day before, and her mother decided that a small reward was in order. After all, what could happen in their safe little town? Just don't wander too far from home, her mother called out as April grabbed her beloved pink bike and disappeared through the front door with her friend. Those would be some of the last words she'd ever say to her daughter. 20 minutes passed. Then 30. April's mother stepped outside into the gathering dusk, calling her daughter's name. The silence that greeted her was deafening. She walked the nearby streets, her heart beginning to race with each empty corner she turned. Their neighborhood sat on the outskirts of Machynlleth, a quiet residential area dotted with apartment buildings and family homes. She checked behind buildings, called April's name louder, but there was nothing. Then she spotted April's friend, alone and visibly shaken. The words that came out of the little girl's mouth would shatter not just one family, but an entire community. A car had pulled up beside them. April had talked to the driver. She had gotten inside willingly. And then they had driven away into the darkness. April's mother's world collapsed in that instant. Her hands shaking, she dialed emergency services, and within minutes, police cars were racing through the streets of Machynlleth. The first officers on the scene immediately understood the gravity of the situation. They sat down with April's friend, speaking gently to extract every detail the traumatized child could remember. The vehicle was described as a gray van. The driver was a man with dark hair and a full beard, wearing a green jacket and sweatpants. But what chilled the officers to the bone was what the friend said next. The man had actually gotten out of the van and physically helped April climb inside. This wasn't a random snatch and grab. This was calculated. April's mother explained through her tears that April had cerebral palsy, which made it difficult for her to climb into vehicles on her own. The killer had known this. He had planned for this. He had helped a disabled child into his van, knowing exactly what he intended to do to her. The friend also mentioned something that seemed odd at first but would prove crucial to the investigation. She said April had gotten into the van on what appeared to be the driver's side. Police immediately realized this likely meant they were dealing with a left-hand drive vehicle, unusual in the UK where most cars have right-hand drive. April's friend had simply assumed she was getting into the driver's seat, but in reality, she was entering from the passenger side of a left-hand drive van. The moment police realized they were dealing with an abduction, the quiet town of Machynlleth exploded into action. A critical incident was declared, and an Amber Alert went out across the region. The description of the suspect and his gray van spread like wildfire through police networks, emergency services, and soon, the general public. Word of April's disappearance spread through Machynlleth faster than anyone thought possible. First, neighbors started gathering outside the Jones family home, offering help, comfort, anything they could do. Then people from nearby towns began arriving. The crowd grew from dozens to hundreds, and what started as a helpful gesture soon became a logistical nightmare for police who needed to conduct door-to-door inquiries. But nothing could stop the outpouring of community support. People shared the news online, drawing even more volunteers to the area. As night fell, hundreds of people combed the streets alongside law enforcement, armed with flashlights and desperate hope. The local waste collection service actually suspended operations because every single worker had abandoned their routes to join the search for April. The case exploded onto national news within hours. Television crews descended on Machynlleth, and police issued public appeals for information. April's photograph, that sweet, innocent face with the bright smile, appeared on screens across the nation. The phones at police headquarters rang non-stop as tips poured in from across the country. Despite the massive mobilization, the first night yielded nothing. They had searched every street, every alley, every building in Machynlleth, but April had vanished as if she'd never existed. As rain began to fall and darkness made searching nearly impossible, police made the difficult decision to expand their search to the surrounding forests and fields. The terrain around Machynlleth was unforgiving, dense woods, steep hills, and boggy fields that could hide secrets for decades. But the search teams refused to stop. Even as the rain soaked through their clothes and the temperature dropped, volunteers and police officers pressed on through the night, calling April's name into the void. When dawn broke on October 2nd, even more volunteers had arrived. Some had traveled from as far away as England to help find one little girl they'd never met. The missing person alerts had been posted on billboards throughout Wales, and the entire nation was holding its breath. As the tips continued flooding in, one name kept appearing in multiple reports: Mark Bridger, a 46-year-old local resident. Several callers mentioned him specifically, and when police began piecing together the information, Bridger quickly rose to the top of their suspect list. First, he matched the physical description provided by April's friend perfectly. Second, and more significantly, he was one of the few people in Machynlleth who owned a left-hand drive vehicle. But what really caught investigators' attention was a witness report that placed Bridger's van in April's neighborhood at the exact time she disappeared. When detectives began digging into Mark Bridger's background, What they found painted a disturbing picture. This wasn't some upstanding citizen who'd made a terrible mistake. Bridger had a lengthy criminal record spanning decades, assaults, thefts, driving offenses, and a pattern of behavior that suggested a man with no respect for the law or other people's safety. Police immediately began searching for Bridger, dispatching officers to every known address where he might be staying. But when they arrived at each location, both Bridger and his van were nowhere to be found. It was as if he'd vanished along with April. Then, breakthrough. A police helicopter spotted a lone figure walking a dog in the hills outside Machynlleth. For nearly half an hour, the helicopter circled overhead, and the man on the ground never once looked up. In a situation where everyone in Wales was talking about the missing child and police helicopters, this behavior was beyond suspicious. It was bizarre. When officers finally approached the man, they asked him to identify himself. "Mark Bridger," he replied immediately, and then added words that sent chills down their spines. "I know what this is about." The officer asked the question that all of Wales was desperate to have answered: "Where is April?" Bridger's response was as shocking as it was suspicious: "It was an accident. I hit her with my car." He was immediately placed under arrest, and as they drove toward the police station, Bridger couldn't stop talking. Despite not being questioned, he launched into an elaborate story that would prove to be filled with holes, contradictions, and outright lies. According to Bridger, he had accidentally struck April with his van while she was playing. He claimed she was unresponsive after the impact, so he had placed her in his vehicle and attempted to give her first aid. But then, he said, everything went blank. He claimed to have experienced some kind of blackout that lasted for hours, and when he finally came to his senses, April's body was gone. Bridger insisted that he had spent the entire night wandering through forests and fields, desperately searching for April. He claimed he only learned her identity that morning when he saw news reports about her disappearance on television. Detectives weren't buying a single word of Bridger's story, and for good reason. The account from April's friend painted a completely different picture. She had clearly seen April talking to the driver and climbing into the van with his assistants, fully conscious and apparently unharmed. If Bridger had actually hit her with his vehicle and knocked her unconscious, why would the witness describe such a different scenario? The memory blackout claim was equally suspicious. But what made investigators even more certain they were dealing with a liar was what they discovered next. Shortly after April's disappearance, Bridger had shaved off both his hair and his beard, a clear attempt to alter his appearance and avoid recognition. When confronted with these inconsistencies, Bridger slightly modified his story. Now he claimed he had been heavily intoxicated that day, which could theoretically explain his supposed memory loss. But he maintained that while he couldn't remember where he had placed April's body, he was certain she was dead and in a safe place. No matter how hard investigators pressed him, they couldn't extract the truth from Bridger. So they shifted their focus to his house, and what they found there was deeply disturbing. The moment forensic teams entered Bridger's home, they were hit with an overwhelming smell of cleaning products. The house was also uncomfortably hot, and they quickly discovered why. A wood-burning stove in the living room had been running for hours, possibly days. The implications were horrifying. Forensic experts carefully collected the ashes from the fireplace and sent them for immediate testing. While they waited for results, they continued processing the scene. Initially, there were no obvious clues, no sign of April, no belongings, nothing that would immediately link her to the house. But when forensics took a closer look using specialized techniques, they found traces of blood throughout the house. Lab results later confirmed what everyone feared: it was April's blood. The innocent little girl had been inside this house of horrors. Investigators then turned their attention to Bridger's van. If his story about accidentally hitting April was true, there should have been evidence, damage to the vehicle, blood, something to support his claim. But there was nothing. The van showed no signs of any accident whatsoever, completely destroying yet another piece of Bridger's fabricated story. Then came the results that would haunt everyone involved in the case. The ashes from Bridger's fireplace contained 17 fragments of human bone, all confirmed to belong to April Jones. An additional bone fragment was discovered in the bathroom drain. The reality was inescapable: sweet little April was dead, and her body had been partially destroyed in that very fireplace. But forensic experts didn't believe Bridger had managed to completely dispose of all her remains. It was far more likely that he had hidden what was left somewhere in the surrounding countryside. If you're still watching and haven't subscribed, I'm honestly curious, what's holding you back? Drop it in the comments. I actually want to know. This case shows us how quickly innocent lives can be destroyed, and sharing these stories helps keep their memory alive. The news that April was most likely dead sent shockwaves throughout Wales and beyond. Until that moment, people had clung to the hope that she might still be alive, that somehow she would be found safe. Now the focus shifted from a rescue operation to a recovery mission, and the heartbreak was overwhelming. The search operation continued, now expanded to become what would go down as the largest in British modern history. Hundreds of professionals from various emergency services joined the effort, alongside countless volunteers who refused to give up. They searched through the most challenging terrains imaginable: rivers, forests, lakes, mountains, determined to find any trace of April so her family could lay her to rest. Meanwhile, detectives continued building their case against Bridger, and what they found on his computer was beyond disturbing. The device was filled with illegal content involving children, images so horrific that seasoned investigators needed counseling after viewing them. Even more sickening, he had saved photographs of victims from other high-profile child murder cases, as if he was collecting trophies or inspiration. Most chilling of all, investigators found dozens of images of local children from Machynlleth that he had downloaded from social media, including photographs of both April and her older sister. He had been watching these children, studying them, planning. The investigation revealed an even more sinister detail. April's older sister disclosed that just a few months before the abduction, Bridger had sent her a friend request on Facebook. When she mentioned it to their father, he immediately recognized the name. He had known Bridger back in the early 1990s but had lost touch with him over the years. Something about the friend request struck April's father as deeply wrong. Why would a grown man he barely remembered want to connect with his teenage daughter on social media? Trusting his instincts, he told his daughter not to accept the request. That decision may have initially saved her life, but it also suggested that Bridger had been planning something involving the Jones family for months. Bridger was a father himself, with 6 children from 4 different relationships. Yet at the time of April's disappearance, he lived alone. Police discovered a disturbing pattern in his romantic history. He frequently pursued relationships with women who had young children. Given the horrific evidence found on his computer, this detail took on a sinister significance that made investigators' blood run cold. These cases remind us how dangerous the world can be. That's why I created a survival guide that shows you real safety strategies drawn from true crime stories. Check out True Crime Survival Guide. The link is waiting for you in the description and pinned comment. As police dug deeper into Bridger's background, they uncovered a man who had spent his entire adult life lying about who he was. He never held down a job for long, constantly jumping between different types of work and leaving a trail of confused employers behind him. But more disturbing were the elaborate fantasies he created about his own life. To some people, Bridger claimed he had served in the military and even suggested he had been involved in covert operations that required him to change his identity for security reasons. This was a complete fabrication, but he repeated these claims even during police interrogations, insisting that he was a patriot who had served his country and would never intentionally harm a child. Detectives realized they were dealing with a pathological liar, someone for whom truth and fiction had become so blurred that he might actually believe his own fabrications. This was supported by another discovery. Bridger had told everyone in Machynlleth that his parents were dead, but they were actually alive and well. The investigation also revealed that Bridger had broken up with his girlfriend just days before April's abduction. People who knew him said he had taken the breakup very badly, spiraling into heavy drinking and increasingly erratic behavior. Computer forensics uncovered an even more disturbing timeline. On the day of April's disappearance, Just hours before she vanished, Bridger had messaged 3 different women asking to meet up. All 3 had turned him down. After these rejections, he had spent time viewing illegal content from his collection of child abuse images. The picture that emerged was of a man whose fantasies about children had been building for years, who had been rejected by multiple women on the very day he decided to act out his most twisted desires on an innocent little girl. Despite the overwhelming evidence of Bridger's guilt, there remained one major problem that tormented April's family and the investigators: her remains were still missing. Desperate for answers, detectives repeatedly appealed to the public, hoping someone had seen Bridger or his van that night and could help them trace his movements. Eventually, a witness came forward with information that seemed promising. He reported seeing Bridger the morning after April's disappearance, around 9 a.m., walking along the riverbank carrying a black bag. The timing and location made this sighting particularly significant. Investigators also discovered that shortly after April's disappearance, Bridger had taken his van to a local repair shop. The mechanics remembered him clearly, not just because of his vehicle, but because of his bizarre behavior. By that time, everyone in Machynlleth knew about April's disappearance, and emotions were running incredibly high throughout the community. But Bridger didn't act like someone who was concerned about a missing child from his community. Instead, he talked about the case as if he were a grieving parent himself. He became visibly emotional, nearly crying as he spoke about April as though she were his own daughter. The mechanics found his reaction theatrical and unsettling. There was something performative about his grief that didn't feel genuine. Following this new lead, search teams focused their efforts along the river, hoping to find any trace of April's remains. They used boats, divers, and specialized equipment to scour every inch of the waterway, but once again found nothing. Realizing that April's body might never be recovered, detectives made the difficult decision to charge Bridger with murder, relying on the overwhelming circumstantial evidence they had collected. They theorized that Bridger had lured April into his van under some pretense, taken her back to his house, sexually assaulted her, and then killed her to prevent her from identifying him. Investigators suspected that Bridger, who had previously worked at a slaughterhouse, might have used those skills to dismember April's body before burning parts of her remains in his fireplace. But forensic experts agreed that it would have been impossible for him to completely dispose of everything, which meant some of her remains had to be hidden somewhere else. Imagine if it was your child, your sister, or your friend. Would you want their story buried under noise, or told with care? Subscribing helps make sure no child's story fades away. With Bridger in custody awaiting trial, search teams continued their efforts despite worsening weather conditions and dwindling leads. The prosecution was confident they could secure a conviction even without recovering April's complete remains, but they refused to give up the search entirely. In total, search teams scoured 60 square kilometers of Welsh countryside, that's 37 square miles of some of the most challenging terrain in Britain. They searched forests, fields, rivers, lakes, abandoned buildings, and anywhere else a body could conceivably be hidden. But they found nothing. In the end, April's parents faced the heartbreaking reality that they would have to bury their daughter without most of her remains. The funeral service was attended by hundreds of people, many of whom had never met April but had been touched by her story. She had become like family to an entire nation, and now they all had to say goodbye. To honor April's memory, her parents placed some of her favorite belongings in the coffin alongside the small bone fragments that had been recovered. The sight of that tiny casket, containing so little of their beloved daughter, was almost too much for anyone to bear. In January 2013, 3 months after April's murder, Mark Bridger stood before a judge and entered a plea of not guilty to murder. Incredibly, at the same time, he admitted that he was probably responsible for her death, a contradictory stance that perfectly exemplified the mind games he had been playing with investigators since his arrest. During the trial, Bridger maintained his ridiculous story about accidentally hitting April with his van, despite all evidence to the contrary. He continued to claim that he couldn't remember where he had hidden her remains, while simultaneously insisting that he had only wanted to help her after the supposed accident. The prosecution methodically destroyed every aspect of Bridger's defense, presenting the blood evidence, the bone fragments, the computer files, and the witness testimony that proved he had deliberately abducted April. The jury wasn't fooled by his performance, they saw right through his lies to the cold-blooded killer underneath. The trial lasted until late May 2013, and when the verdict came, there was no surprise. Mark Bridger was found guilty of the murder of April Jones and sentenced to life imprisonment without the possibility of parole, one of the harshest sentences possible under British law. After his conviction, Bridger was transferred to a high-security prison where his crimes had not gone unnoticed by other inmates. He was attacked and stabbed several times with a makeshift weapon, though his injuries were not fatal. Even among criminals, those who harm children are considered the lowest of the low. For years after his sentencing, detectives continued reaching out to Bridger, hoping he would finally tell them where April's remains were located. But he never wavered from his claims of memory loss, maintaining his lies even when offered potential benefits for cooperation. Then, several years into his sentence, police received a tip from another inmate who claimed that Bridger had confessed to dumping April's remains in the river near his home. However, investigators weren't convinced by this information. If a bag containing human remains had been thrown into that waterway, it likely would have surfaced at some point, and given that search teams had thoroughly examined the river system for miles, it seemed unlikely that this tip was accurate. In November 2014, the local government made a symbolic gesture that brought some closure to the community. They purchased Bridger's house and announced that it would be demolished. Hundreds of locals, including April's parents, gathered to watch as the building where their daughter had suffered and died was torn down brick by brick. It was a small act of justice, erasing the physical reminder of evil from their community. But even as the house disappeared into rubble, the pain remained. In 2018, April's family faced yet another heartbreaking ordeal when her father fell seriously ill and suffered partial memory loss. When he regained consciousness in the hospital, he began asking his wife why April hadn't come to visit him. His wife was forced to break the devastating news to him all over again, that their little girl was gone. In a cruel twist of fate, he had to relive the agony of losing April a second time. As for the search for April's remains, it officially ended in 2013, though police have stated they would be willing to restart if credible new information emerged. But as the years have passed, hope has faded. It has now been over 12 years since April was taken from her family, and detectives privately admit that the chances of ever finding her complete remains are virtually non-existent. If you enjoy the stories I share here, you'll love my new book True Crime Survival Guide, How to Stay Safe in a Dangerous World. It goes deeper, with real case lessons and practical tips to help keep you safe. Get it now through the link in the description and pinned comment. The case of April Jones remains one of the most devastating crimes in British history, not just because of the brutality inflicted on an innocent child, but because of the way it shattered a community's sense of safety and security. Machynlleth was the kind of place where parents felt comfortable letting their children play outside, where neighbors looked out for each other, where evil wasn't supposed to exist. Mark Bridger took all of that away in a single moment of unspeakable cruelty. He didn't just kill April Jones, he killed the innocence of an entire town and left scars that will never fully heal. This took me hours of painful research, reading police files, autopsy reports, and court documents that detailed the suffering of an innocent child. If you felt safe watching from your screen, the least you can do is hit that red subscribe button. April's story deserves to be remembered, and sharing these cases helps us understand the darkness that exists in our world so we can better protect ourselves and our loved ones. The legacy of April Jones should not be forgotten. She was more than a victim, she was a bright, loving child who brought joy to everyone who knew her. Her pink bicycle may no longer race through the streets of Machynlleth, but her memory lives on in the hearts of all who refuse to let her story be forgotten. What are your thoughts on this devastating case? Do you think Mark Bridger will ever reveal where April's remains are located? Share your thoughts in the comments below, And don't forget to hit that like button if this video made you think about the importance of keeping our children safe. Thank you for watching Cold Crime Cases, and remember, in a world where monsters like Mark Bridger exist, we must never stop fighting to protect the innocent. I'll see you in the next case.